Self-awareness, the inner compass, part 2. Stay with me. Self-awareness, the hardest emotional intelligence strategy, admitting our brutal truth. No mask, no fear, with courage. Face it to thrive, to reborn free. Use the long, truthful story as the anchor for a funnel that funds the work. Lead magnets, courses, cohorts, so that your labor becomes sustainable. But let profit be derivative of practice, not the primary motive. The market rewards sincerity. The money follows when people feel seen and taught. We are not alone in this. Look at Mandela, Frankel, Jobs. Their lives map the same curve: suffering, reflection, reconfiguration, teaching. There is humility in that arc, humility and responsibility. You have been given a wound and a capacity. What are you obliged to do with them? I argue. Make a practice that others can follow. Make an institution, even a small one, a newsletter, a cohort, a ritualized workshop. Convert your scar into a shared instrument. The work of self-awareness ripples outward when it is turned into teaching. At the end of the maturational arc comes a strange, quiet victory. You find that your decisions are no longer emergencies, they are calibrated experiments. It speaks in storms. A fine, slow rain becomes a torrent. A tremor becomes an earthquake. And inside that noise, before the charts, before the council, before the polite prescriptions, a private sky opened and spoke to me in lightning. I remember the light in the clinic. Not cruel, not theatrical, simply clinical, as if the world could be comforted by an even luminescence. The doctor's mouth shaped probabilities like currency. He offered percentages as if numbers could hold the place of prayer. He clocked logistics and options with the competence of someone who had practiced facing the day's cruelties and renaming them into procedures. I nodded because that is what we do. We nod when we are given data. We nod to be reasonable, to be acceptable, to be the kind of person who meets bad news with decorum. But the body was a different newsroom. It was making different headlines. A surge of heat behind my ribs that felt like a fuse lighting. The breath caught in the small place under the breastbone where panic collects. A throb at the temple that translated into words I could not yet speak. I am not enough. I have always been the one who holds. If I stop, the world will tip. The storm was not merely fear of death. It was a choir of smaller, filigreed fears, the loud, obvious terror and a whispering guilt. I should not want help. I should not need to slow. I should not be the one who loses grip. This guilt was curious. It was not rational. It had no place on a chart. It did not appear in the doctor's options. It was older. It traced its line to awards and applause and the quiet myth I had carried, that strength is invisible, that strength is relentless, that strength is proof. Each small piece of that myth had been a tool in my life, a lever that pivots action into outcome. But leaned on at the wrong time, the tool becomes a shackle. Pride disguised as endurance, endurance disguised as virtue. I recognized the voice because I had taught it before. Keep going. Keep proving. Keep being indispensable. It is a voice that primarily loves the idea of you as a public project, not as a fragile person. 81 point. in a fever of wanting to be the person everyone expected, I nearly made a catastrophic bargain with mortality. I almost returned to work too quickly because to stop felt like admitting failure. The idea of stepping away, of letting the schedule slide, of hearing my inbox queue up, terrified me. Pride is a cunning lover. It will cajole you into performance even as you bleed. I could see it then as if from outside, my hands, palms flat on a patience chart, pressing down as if that pressure would flatten the ache. This was not leadership. This was a wounded ego negotiating with a horizon I had not yet accepted. I learned a second lesson in those early days. There is a difference between acting brave and being brave. The first is theatre, the second is truth. Bravery born of performance collapses as soon as the applause stops. Bravery born of truth is material. It alters your bones, the architecture of how you make decisions and whom you allow into the scaffolding of your life. So I stopped. Not as grandly as you might imagine. Nobody needs heroics in the first minutes of a storm. I sat with my notebook. I sat in silence. I walked until the city's noise softened into a single distant heartbeat. I prayed in ways that had nothing to do with ritual and everything to do with listening. I wrote without a style guide and without the expectation that anything would come of it. I let the sentences be ugly and true.in those days I repeated a litany because rituals have an argument with panic. The litany was simple and stubborn. I wrote it until the letters smudged. Pain is not my enemy. Pain is the all. I am the furnace. Say it out loud when you cannot breathe. Say it when your hands refuse to steady. Say it when the world tells you to prove you unbroken. Say it until the words stop sounding like prayer and start working like instruction. Each repetition was a tiny alchemical process. The phrase moved from impression to language to pattern. It anchored me to a new grammar. Not I must perform to be worthy, but my worth does not depend on endurance alone. The writing did what writing does when it is honest. It moved the storm into a map. In the journal I began listing the small truths. I fear irrelevance more than illness. That sentence was a revelation and an act of minor violence against a long habit. When put into a sentence, the fear lost some of its amorphous capacity to terrorize. It became a thought I could interrogate. Why did irrelevance haunt me? Because for years I had been measured by output, by invitations, by eyes on a stage. My identity had been partly constituted by the metrics others used to value me. The idea of slowing down translated, in that ledgered logic, into non-existence. Seeing the sentence change the tide. You must understand the strange economy of power. We assume movement equals meaning. We think that staying busy is staying relevant. But truth does not always circulate through motion. Sometimes truth is stillness. Sometimes truth sits, waits, watches, and speaks with a voice that only those who have stopped long enough can hear. My acceptance of help was a second alchemy. Before, help felt like a debt. Receiving assistance felt like owing someone a story I could not pay back. I had been raised in a scarcity myth, that vulnerability is a liability you must hide to maintain the narrative of sufficiency. But in the quiet of the walks and the maps and the pages, I saw that help transforms the architecture of survival into a network. When I allowed someone else to drive me to a clinic, when I let a friend bring soup, when I accepted that a colleague could take a meeting for me, something practical shifted. The ecosystem of care formed. It was not humiliation. It was reallocation. Resources are not moral characters. They are materials you can deploy. Pride had previously treated the world as an audience. Acceptance treated it as a cooperator. Let me tell you about a morning that changed the grammar of my decisions. I woke after a night that had left a residual thunder in my limbs. The day demanded choices. The instincts of the ego whispered to pick the boldest way to show I was unbroken. Instead, I chose to do one different thing. I performed a boundary. I told my assistant to postpone all meetings for 2 weeks. This simple act felt like treason at first. It was an act I had often instructed others to take, but never allowed myself. My chest clenched as if I had betrayed a contract with myself. Then the pause arrived. For the first time in years, it tasted like permission. Permission is a radical currency. It recalibrates how power functions. Power, in the most generous understanding, is not the capacity to hold everything alone, but the capacity to arrange help. When you permit yourself to receive, you change the orchestration. The world does not collapse. Meetings reschedule. People adapt. And the leader, who once counted relevance in constant action, discovers a different ledger that values depth over noise. The compass in the dark did not arrive fully formed as a grand epiphany. It arrived as small availabilities, a breath measured before a decision, a shorthand lifted in a meeting to ask a question instead of answer, a private line in a journal where I wrote what my body felt. Name it. The neuroscientists told us in simple studies, to name the emotion reduces the fear's amplitude. So I began to name. I wrote, tightness under the sternum, fear. Reduces amygdala reactivity and increases cognitive control. In my language, it felt like pulling an anchor up and seeing the sea clear. Every day, I rehearsed 3 mantras aloud. Saying them gave the language gravity and turned private insight into public muscle. I whispered them to myself in the shower. I said them before meetings. I said them in the car. The tone did not matter. Repetition did. Mantra 1. Pain is ore. I am the furnace. Mantra 2. I choose truth over image. Mantra 3. Help is not debt. It is alliance. These lines became my beat. They brought order. They invited me to work with the world, not against it. They allowed me to see the difference between being in control and orchestrating care. There was, of course, grief. Grief is not neat. It arrives like a guest without converse. It sits down and flattens the sofa. It asks difficult questions. It does not accept apologies. But grief, refined, is a teacher. There were days I wrote only the word grief on a blank page and let the page hold me. On other days I wrote the sentence, "I miss what I used to imagine for myself." The writing did not solve the grief. No alchemy does that quickly, but the act of transcription softened the edges. When grief is named, it stops pretending to be all of you. From those named edges, an odd clarity emerged, the capacity to choose treatments with a different logic. I discovered that panic sculpts a narrow path in a tiny mind. Panic often says, "Do something big now, act, replace, assert." While calm says, "What is the option that sustains me for the long run?" In that distinction between the quick and the durable, I found a principle that would govern much of my life thereafter. Choose the course that fits the true horizon you want to live by, not the temporary shore the panic offers. That distinction moved me to accept appointments I had been avoiding, to read medical literature with a quiet, steady curiosity instead of a desperate need for transfiguring evidence, to ask the surgeon direct questions about long-term quality of life rather than a singular focus on immediate survival metrics. It is not that I became less fearful of death. I became less fearful of being governed by fear. The lucidity that came from that choice was its own kind of victory. It taught me the language of deliberate consent, not consent offered under duress, but consent formed with knowledge and care. And in the slow arc of recovery, there was a new discovery. The wound, once treated as a defect to hide, becomes a map that others can use. I began to speak in small groups about the experience, about the shame I had felt, about the odd guilt at needing to pause. My words had an effect I had not expected. People nodded, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a small, relieved laugh. They recognized pieces of themselves in the fragments I displayed. A friend wrote to me months later, "Your honesty gave me permission to tell my mother I needed help." That is alchemy of a different order, the private wound made public in service to others. The compass not only guided me, it offered a vector for others to orient by. There are, I must confess, moments of vanity still. Old habits are not annihilated by a single winter. Sometimes I catch myself staging resilience. A camera clicks in my mind and suddenly I preen. I remind myself of the work that remains. Self-awareness is not a destination, it is a practice. It is the act of returning again and again to the same small interrogations. What is the feeling? Where does it live? What story is it telling? And each time you return, you hone the instrument a little further. Paint Again is not a slogan. It is a sequence of actions. Paint Again is a redrawal of your architecture. Pain reveals brokenness. You name the narrative. You convert the visceral into the strategic. You craft rituals to rewire habits. You allow your life to be rearranged by truth rather than pretense. This is the alchemy I learned in the clinic and practiced in the quiet corners of my days. It does not promise invulnerability. It promises clarity. And clarity is the closest thing we have to mercy in a world of inevitable suffering. When I speak of glory or godlike states, because you asked me in the heart of the night for a language that flares, know that I do not mean immortality or dominion. I mean something smaller and stranger, the sense that you have been through fire and not only remained, but been remade into someone whose decisions have weight that lasts beyond momentary applause. Glory, in this sense, is not spectacle, it is depth. It is the quiet confidence of a person who has seen the bottom of the chasm and chosen a bridge rather than a shout. When suffering is transmuted, it lights a lantern you can hold for others. That light is what I mean when I use terms like godlike. It is not hubris, it is the calm, sovereign capacity to meet the world and refuse to do harm. So the compass in the dark became more than a metaphor for me. It became a protocol. It demanded practices, journaling, prayer, repeated mantras, selective withdrawal, naming, small rituals of acceptance, the slow engineering of new habits. It required that I let go of the myth that relevancy is scored by perpetual motion. It required that I learn to measure worth not by how much I can do, but by how well I arrange the space so that others can do and be. The storms did not stop. Sometimes the sky still opens. The body still remembers the old energies and will test me. But the difference now is that I have a way to read the weather. I feel the tightening of the chest and I name it. I feel the lust for action and I ask whether it serves the long view. I feel the surge of pride and I call for a disconfirming voice at the table. I feel the tug of self-sufficiency and I allow a hand to be put in mine. This is my final, stubborn instruction. Do not try to be the person who never breaks. That person is a brittle idol. Rather, be the person who knows how to bend and come back with a shape more fit for purpose. Let your scars be signposts. Let your pauses be prayers. Let your chosen rituals be the tools by which you convert the private into the public good. You approach the world with a steadier hand. You accept help because you recognize its economies. You refuse spectacle because you prefer depth. You stop measuring yourself by movement and start measuring by meaning. That shift produces a different kind of success, one that is less flashy but more durable, less exultant but more generative. This is not asceticism. It is practical spirituality. It is the art of living where the inner compass is the tool and the world is the test. It asks patience and gives back lucidity. The process takes years, not months. But the arc bends toward form, a self that is an amalgam of cultures, a leader whose scars are not liabilities, but signposts, a person who can convert private depth into public goods. So begin, inventory your scars, map their competencies, craft the daily practices that train your inner compass. Tell one true story, teach what you learn, build the systems that scale your care, and in the doing realize that the project of self is not narcissistic self-fashioning, but a public work. We become wiser together. The compass in the dark is passed hand to hand, first as confession, then as curriculum, and finally as a light. Let us be alchemists. Let us turn our ore into gold, not for vanity, but for the generations who will need our lanterns when their storms arrive. Pain becomes gain only when you are willing to do the work of turning heat into metal, into something you can use. At night, in the hush after the city sleeps, I still repeat the mantras. They are my liturgy and my labor. I still whisper, pain is ore, I am the furnace. I choose truth over image. Help is not debt, it is alliance. My scars are my strategy. Say them until the words stop being words. Let them become conductors for an interior electricity that lights not just your path, but the paths of those who follow. That is the alchemy. That is the compass. That is how a life, tested by fire, becomes a torch for others. Subscribe, share, care, comment. See you for another conversation.